Well, a very good morning to you. The media has come under close scrutiny, and 2013 had also been a very challenging year. But towards the end, there was all the talk about, well, the media fund and its management and how it needs to be adequately distributed or dispersed in the current year we are 2014. Thanks again for joining me for the AM Talk, which is, of course, on the AM show, which is live on the multi-TV channel of Joynews. Now, I have in the studio Suleiman Brahima. He's the Deputy Executive Director for the Media Foundation for West Africa, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Robert.
Always very equivocal as far as the subject of the media is concerned, but particularly on this very subject of the management of the media fund. But first, we would have to ask him, what do you make of the performance of the media the year past?
Well, I would always, I mean, I've had to answer this question on several platforms, and my take has always been that, well, it's difficult to say the media was perfect, but at the same time, I think that it wouldn't be right to say that the media did not perform. And so I would always put it at an average performance. There were high points, there were low points, and I think that we keep learning, and I expect that our media will continue to grow.
And especially if we take it off from the latter part of the previous year, that's 2012, prior to the elections, the Media Foundation spearheaded this very is it barometer kind of a survey, so to speak, that type of monitoring in which media and its sources were usually scrutinized and their content well analyzed to make sure that they were kept on their toes. Could we have better continued that very strategy in the last year, and just to bring it in line?
Well, I think you are referring to a specific project that the Media Foundation decided to carry out during the electioneering campaign. And I think it was on the basis of several concerns about the fact that, elections in Africa generally are often associated with, violence and conflicts and so on and so forth. And so during elections, I think that there's this whole campaign for peace and all of that. So different organizations decided to do different things. And one of the things that we did, based on the fact that we are focused on the media, the work that we do relates to the media, we said, well, let us monitor people's comments on radio, on television, in the newspapers. Unfortunately, we could only handle radio, and of course here in Ghana perhaps it is the most accessible, the most influential, because everywhere in the country people have access to radio. So specifically we were monitoring issues related to ethics, ethical conduct in the media, and also how people, panelists and guests, conduct themselves when they are on radio. I think that it would be useful to have continued, and people have said, well, it's a project that shouldn't just be tied to elections. It's something that must go on. But I think broadly, if we had the capacity, and capacity in terms of human resource, in terms of funding, I think it would be useful to monitor the performance of the media in general, beyond what people say. In the newspapers, are there follow-ups? Are people doing the investigative stories that must be done? Are we just witnessing, coverage of events? People have talked about the petition at the Supreme Court, for example, as something that really put the media under pressure. But it was an event coverage. A lot of things are happening within the political realm. Are the media bringing out the most salient and relevant issues to the public? Or is it just that, what the president says we should be hopeful for, in 2014, and that is what is splattered on the front pages of our newspapers?
Now, in looking at what the content of perhaps the benchmarks for monitoring or assessing the media, do you think that, well, that very assertion that the media is always so much fixated on just unearthing corruption, investigation, and not promoting the critical need, because we're of that nature as a country, of development of the people, of his audiences?
Well, I think that sometimes when we talk about investigative journalism or investigations in the media, people tend to put their minds to, wrongdoings within government.
Well, is it not because the media has tend to portray that as a sin?
Well, generally, I think so. I agree with you. But I think talking about investigations, it could be on any subject. It could be on sanitation, it could be on education, it could be on health, it could be on environment, it could be on mining, and all the other things that we can think about. And I believe these are issues that affect the daily lives of people depending on where people are. If you go to mining communities, the priority would be maybe how mining is affecting the lives of the people there. If you take Accra, perhaps some of the big issues are, sanitation, indiscipline on our roads, and so on and so forth.
In more congested communities.
Exactly. If you go to the north, maybe the priorities will be different. But at the same time, it wouldn't be right to say, well, let us focus on these issues in the various communities without also looking at what government is doing.
But you will be real and say that perhaps we need a better balanced way of undertaking what we do than we currently are doing.
Well, I think that the media have to do more. I wouldn't say that we are doing as much as we should at this stage. Essentially, even in terms of what goes into your work, production, sometimes one would feel one would ask whether the media are being serious. I have been on, some television platforms where, as you are seated, that is the time they are going to ask you, what's your name, where do you work, what's your designation.
What are we going to talk about?
What are we going to talk about sometimes, what do you think? And you may have been called 3 days prior to the program, and you wonder whether people may have investigated the guest who is coming onto their program, what issues they have expertise in, issues that they are passionate about, comments that they've made in the past, and whether they'll be consistent on the program. And it cuts across, even with politicians. You invite an MP onto your program, and there are pertinent questions that their constituents would want to hear. And it's all about talking about the ordinary things. The president says 2014 is going to be a better year. What do you think? As a member of parliament, I think there are key issues that the media would always have to focus on. And it also calls for preparation, it calls for reading, it calls for learning what you do and taking your work serious. And I doubt if, all journalists take their work in that line.
Now, let's look at media ownership. At the Media Foundation for West Africa, is it something perhaps you look into? Is it something that perhaps you're worried about because of where we're coming from as a country, as a continent, and sometimes how ownership also tends to permeate or influence editorial policies, etc.?
Well, I think it's a big issue globally. In fact, last year, I think during the third quarter of last year, there was a global forum to discuss, issues affecting the media and ethics in particular. And I think the focus then was about ethics for owners, moving away from ethical guidelines for practitioners, because a lot has been done in that area, and most journalists are aware of what they are supposed to do. And so the focus then was shifting to ethics for owners and ethics within the boardroom, the decisions that are taken by owners, how owners control editorial content, and so on and so forth. Now here in Ghana, I think it's also becoming a big issue from two perspectives. One is, what people have said, politicians owning media and what they use the media outlets for. And I think it's playing out quite significantly, especially during our monitoring, that radio stations that are owned by politicians sometimes tend to be high in terms of the number of incidents of unethical conduct, just because a radio station is particular about promoting the agenda of the party that the owner belongs to. Now, the other issue of concern in terms of ownership is the emerging trend of conglomeration in the media industry, as they will put it, and where you would have
one owner owning multiple
owning multiple media outlets. And globally, it's been shown that to some extent, such persons or such media entities would sometimes have very, very big influence. And depending on what they choose to do, they can influence a lot of things.
And we have an example. For example, you take Rupert Murdoch, the Berlusconis, etc., who own various media outlets, and even some transcend countries and continents. And it's been investigated to be concluded that really they are friends with the top politicians, and they influence even sometimes policy to the extent.
No, that's right, and that is why I think here in Ghana perhaps we may want to begin to study how it's playing out, because it's emerging. You have one company owning, a television station, radio stations, perhaps
it's a free market world. It's not a big deal, is it?
No, it is. It may not be a big deal.
If it's a business sector that is striving and has the money in there, and you have an investment opportunity or an investment idea, you can always invest.
Yeah, sure. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but what I'm saying is that it's a phenomenon that requires some study and requires attention, so that at any point in time we would know how to, handle such, big media organizations. Because locally also we have to look at the competition and the fact that rural-based media would also have to thrive. If you have, big media organizations that are not just television, radio, or newspapers or online, but are out competing, for example, radio stations in the rural communities. There is also the issue about the frequency allocation and the range. You are in far away in my village in maybe Pusiga, and you are not listening to quality radio in Garu, or you are not listening to A1 radio in Bolgatanga, but then you are having live feed from a radio station in Accra.
Either through satellite transmission.
Exactly. And then we keep talking about...
What does that do to the audience, and what they tend to assimilate and what they tend to comprehend?
No, what happens then is that the local stations lose their audience, and therefore they are somehow compelled to hook on to the stations that people would want to listen to from Accra. They don't get local advertising revenue. And as a result, when you go there and you say, look, you are a radio station based in Bolga, why are you not focusing on the key developmental issues in Bolgatanga? There is sanitation problem, there is environmental problem, there is gold mining in Nangodi, and all these local issues that deserve attention locally. And then they will tell you, well, the reality is that people are not listening to us. People want to listen to the joys, the cities, and so on and so forth.
Also because they can't invest in the right human resource to go and unearth the stories and do the proper investigations and get the stories and keep the right personnel. Well, because now media is business.
Yes, it is.
Business is media.
It is, Roland. But the reality then also is that, yes, you may, from the onset, invest capital into recruiting the best brains that are around. But your aim then as business is to make profit as you go along. But here is the case where even as you do that, then there is competition from the capital. So you are being out-competed because people would want to listen to ministers. We've had training programs in the north where a journalist tells you, look, it's a struggle to get a minister to talk on our show. You call a minister in Accra.
Immediately say, why are you calling from?
Yes.
Then they send to...
And then the person tells you, I'm busy. The next time, within the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you hear the person on another network in Accra.
Which is bigger.
And people would want to listen to their ministers. People want to listen to their
I get your point. Now, reversing back to the issue of ownership, that also translates into what funds are available to do media work. And are you happy with ownership vis-a-vis emoluments and the way they compensate for work done for personnel, and how that also translates into the output?
Well, I think they are big.
Perhaps I have not had the experience because of where I have worked up to this very stage. Yes. But I see it all around me, and it's not a sight to behold.
Yeah, it is true. You talk to media managers or media owners, and they tell you, yes, we know that our journalists are not being paid well, and as a result, it affects their work output. But the reality also is that we can pay them as much. If as a media organization I'm not earning much, I'm not getting advertising, the district assembly is not helping in any way, even though I'm supposed to be contributing to the development within the district, then really how much can I pay? And then you also have a situation where the big media organizations go around, look for the best around, and then pick them up. And of course, if the person is going to be paid well, then why not? So you would have maybe a very good presenter working at Liberty FM at Sehiri or Quality Radio in Garu, and then before you realize, this person is either in Kumasi or in Accra working for a big radio station, and then management have to scout around, look for maybe a local person, train the person, and then before they are good, they leave again. So it's really a struggle that we have to look at in terms of sustaining community radio, sustaining rural media.
But even in urban communities, it's very difficult to keep a top-class media person for a very long time, because once their ambitions run out, and their ambitions are not met, then they try to find new pastures.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that plays out in almost every occupation, in almost every industry. It's about job satisfaction. It's about the way you are treated. It's about your ambition. And of course, if you were working somewhere and you think that you are not really pursuing what you thought or what you hoped for, obviously you would leave. But we are talking about a situation where, we talk about poaching. Of course, if the big players decide to be poaching from each other, well, that happens everywhere. But I think that the concern then is, those media outlets in out of the capital, out of the big cities, that are very important for local development, that are very crucial, for citizens' participation in governance processes at the local level, not being able to sustain themselves in terms of the financial requirement, the logistical requirement, and the personnel that are supposed to be used for running.
Are you worried at the foundation that perhaps this is translating in some not too good output? I won't say a poor output per se.
Yes, in the rural communities, and I keep emphasizing the rural communities because
perhaps maybe that's a focus now for the foundation.
Well, not really, but I think that is where development concerns really exist. Here in Accra, we are applying on tarred roads, on big roads, the George Bush highway. We complain about water, but here in Kokomlemle, for example, I think water flows almost every time. Electricity is available, and so on and so forth. The big schools are here. People can afford to do decent jobs. Big media organizations are here. But you go to the rural communities and when you read even the newspapers are online and you listen to television bulletins, you would see the kinds of lives that people are living, and yet common fund goes, there is internally generated funds, there are royalties and so on and so forth. And that is why I think that, and also if you take, for example, the North, we talk about the problem of Kayayi. I think it's because there is lack of development. Because if people are empowered in terms of education, in terms of employment and all of that, why would we have people trooping, down
just
from the north? Just
because they don't have the satisfaction.
Exactly. Yeah. And so
it's all got to do with livelihood.
Yes. There are challenges here in Accra, there are challenges in Kumasi, in Takoradi. Okay. But then the biggest challenges in terms of development and quality of life still remain in the rural areas. And given that the media have a role to play, it's important that at some point we give attention to strengthening the media in the rural communities.
Well, we have some of your comments also on the Facebook page for the AM show as well as the Joy News channel. We have this one from Newton Jaffet, who says, so far so good, the media has done well, but more room for improvement. I suggest that they do follow up on issues reported to find out whether those issues are resolved. Excellent, according to IC Leonardo Sec Pedro, super fantastic, a black man with a Spanish link name. Abdul Razak Isahaku, perfect and not bad, according to Nana Meyao Emmanuel, confidence, and I think they did well, and that's from Messinam Agata. And yes, seriously, I give them 100%, and well, the benchmark already given, and the marking scheme put together by Bismarck Atu Ediakon. And the EC police and the government of Ghana did not treat them well during the election, but they did very well. Every year, media personnel are beaten during elections. Some others are killed around the world. So I guess it's the hazards of the job. Richard J. Ajiman. But this one says, very poor. You don't investigate issues for it to be well resolved. You wait when the problem arises, then you be rushing for reporting. See how student nurses are suffering. Oh yes, student nurse Umar Yush Farouk. Well, that's the difficulty Umar seems to be having. The other difficulty that perhaps that has been observed is also that while it is good to investigate and bring out the wrong, sometimes the media has not been objective to whoever the allegations have been raised to, and that has been thought worldwide to be very much unethical. And sometimes we've seen some apologies and some retractions and some rejoinders here and there. That's not good enough.
It is. I mean, it's not good. But I think we also need to acknowledge that as a big industry, once a while, such lapses may occur. Sometimes it may not be deliberate. Sometimes it may be for one reason or the other. It is something that we, as managers, as editors, we must consistently work against. But as I said, once a while, certain things or lapses can occur. And when they do occur, the professional thing to do is to acknowledge that this was a mistake on our part, and therefore we do retract and apologize to the persons who are affected. Now, the issue of objectivity will continue to be a raging issue, because it's been difficult to define or to clearly establish what is objective. I think it's about fairness. The fact that this particular issue is about Roland, and I'm writing about Roland, and therefore I just have to get his side of the story. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Or this is about MPP or NDC. People sometimes say, well, as a newspaper, you have to be, do equal stories or do the same number of stories for various political parties. Well, if it happens, that is good, but it's something that may also happen, that a paper is aligned to the MPP or aligned to the NDC, and what is important is the accuracy of the stories that are put out, the fairness of the stories that are put out. If a newspaper decides that I'm looking at, the errors in governance, the negative things that are happening, the bad things that are happening, I think that it should be factual, it should be accurate, it should be truthful. That for me is very important.
Okay, and then the latter part of the year brought the subject of the media fund, because government had promised that in an earlier budget, and then, the difficulty was about disbursement and who should manage the fund, etc. I have heard you on various platforms on the subject as well. If you take the current state as it is it because the media is in need, or we think that it's the responsibility of government as a stakeholder to support the media?
Well,
because really, a lot of the media houses, the top ones, they make a lot of money, so sometimes it beats the mind of the ordinary person why the media should be supported in a way.
Well, I think that essentially it is because of the acknowledged fact that you need a strong, vibrant, pluralistic, independent media to support democratic development and to support development in general. And this is something that just doesn't pertain to Ghana. And that is why at some point, I think in 2000, when the ECOWAS adopted a protocol on good governance and democracy, which is a guiding document on how, you know, the region promotes development, democracy, and you know, human rights within the region, it was factored in there that, you know, member countries should endeavor to support, you know, in whatever form, including financial, media organizations in their countries. And it is on the basis that, you know, such a contribution would help promote, you know, the development of the media and therefore contribute to development invariably. And I think that this may have been one of the reasons why the government decided to set up a fund like, you know, the Media Development Fund. And also, I believe that locally, the government also acknowledged that, well, there are problems and challenges facing the media. It may not be the big, you know, media organizations, but there are, you know, challenges confronting even the big ones as we talk about, because, you know, we are nowhere near the BBCs of the world. We are nowhere, the newspapers are nowhere near. Even if you take Nigeria, the Guardian, the Punch, you know, our newspapers are not there yet. And so even if you are talking about the big media organizations here in Ghana, I believe that there are challenges here and there. And so it's not because essentially the big media, for example, need that kind of support, but I believe that it was something that was worthwhile. It was something that was significant, you know, to help promote development and democratization in this country. If it were to be put into proper, you know, use.
Then the difficulty is for stakeholders is, well, perhaps its establishments has not been well grounded. What will result in that very conclusion? Because an announcement has been made essentially, and well, a fund has been promised with seed capital, etc.
Well, I think that we need to clearly understand the genesis of all this. And as I said, I think in terms of the rationale, it may have been, as I have already said, it was in November 2011 that the finance minister announced, you know, the allocation of 1 million Ghana cedis in the 2012 budget. But prior to that, the current president and then vice president in 2010, or I think, yes, 2010, did indicate during the GJA Awards the government's intention to set up a fund like that. And therefore, the announcement by the finance minister in November 2011 was an actualization of what had been said by the then vice president and now president. So following the allocation of the money in 2012, I think that there were some discussions about going forward with the utilization. And I remember Honorable Okujeto Ablakwa, then Deputy Minister for Information, making statements about when the fund was going to be utilized in 2012. But apparently it didn't happen until February this year, February 2013, when the President in his State of the Nation's address did indicate that the fund was going to be operational. And I've also heard that there's even been an additional allocation of 2 million Ghana cedis in the 2013 budget, which I think is yet to be utilized. And the controversy is all about how it's been utilized. Originally, some of us did not even know that the money has been utilized. And so, as the President said, well, the fund is going to be operational. That was in February. As we headed towards the end of the year, we thought that, why don't we find out? Because the President said this in February. Why is it that the money is there and it's not being used? It's not as though the media don't need money. They need money, especially, you know, the not big ones need money. And so let us find out whether the money is still sitting down, and if so, why? And in the announcement, the finance minister had clearly indicated. So if you read the 2012 budget, it's clearly stated that the fund will be managed by a trust, you know. And so we were wondering. So some of us called, you know, some of the media stakeholders, the GJA, the Primpac, the GEBA, and we're asking, so what is happening? Because these are groups that we work with, you know, as a media advocacy organization. So because there was no clarity, we decided to issue a statement to find out where the money is. And then eventually we were told that the money has been utilized for buying RLG laptops for journalists, because initially we were told, the media stakeholders said that was a priority for journalists who needed them so that when they are on the field they can report on time and so on and so forth. The media stakeholders have come out to say, well, we haven't been part of any discussion that concluded that it was laptops that we needed for our people. Even though we received some laptops, we were not told it was coming from the media fund, and so on and so forth. At this stage, I think that my conclusion is that the utilization of the first 1 million Ghana cedis has been a mess, but I mean, it's gone. And so we have to look forward to how we can better manage and utilize the subsequent allocations.
Now, talking about management, how crucial would it be for it to be well structured so that there's clarity and there's transparency?
No, I think it's very important. People have asked questions about, so how do we manage the fund? The ministry's position, as I've heard them say, is that, well, it is money coming from the budget and therefore it has to be managed by, the ministry so that the ministry can be accountable and all of that. I think elsewhere it's done differently. In Côte d'Ivoire, they have a media development fund that is managed by the statutory regulator, the Council National de la Presse. In our context, it will be the National Media Commission. In Benin, they have a similar fund that is being managed by their statutory regulator. And therefore, in Ghana here, one would have thought that it would have been the National Media Commission. And that has been our position. And I think that is the position also of the National Media Commission. The Commission is not a private entity. It is a statutory body created by the Constitution. And I have a difficulty, or I find it difficult to understand why people would have difficulties with our position that, or the NMC's position that it should be the manager, because it is truly the most representative entity, even beyond the fact that it is a constitutional creation mandated with, the responsibility for ensuring media professionalism and media development in the country. So, I mean, right from the word go, if you have an institution created by the Constitution mandated to promote media professionalism and media development, and you have a media development fund, then you would assume that, well, then that body should be the one to manage it. Beyond that, the NMC, the commission is made up of various people from different backgrounds. You have representatives from the training institutions, the GIJs, the School of Communication Studies, the AUCCs, and so on and so forth. You have representatives from the Advertisers and Public Relations Association. You have representatives from the Bar Association, from the GJA, from GIBA, from PRIMPAG, from NAT, from the religious bodies, both Muslims and Christians. So I think it's a truly representative body. And indeed, you have people with expertise in the field of media, who are there. And even if the fund or the money is not given to them, I think that the NMC would be in a better position to be able to define what the needs of the Ghanaian media are, rather than the ministry. Because if you take the people at the top of the Ministry of Information, the 3 ministers, the minister and the 2 deputies, I think none of them has
an insight.
Yes,
adequately
it's a trained journalist, and I don't know. I stand for correction, but I don't think any of them has even practiced journalism before to be able to appreciate on the field and in practical terms what the realities of the problems in the media are. So I doubt what the capacity and expertise there is for them to be the managers of the fund.
Okay. Now, in going forward, in all this argument or the contributions of various opinion, if congregated, you get a summation that perhaps the media is only deemed to be journalism. Is that perhaps a very skewed way of looking at what the media is and what the role of journalism also is?
Well,
because the media, I know, is a very encompassing institution. There are people who do marketing communications, there are people who do advertising, public, and they all practice just within the media space. Of course, the overriding perhaps sects in there will be the journalists and etc. I mean, that's it.
Well, I think that when you talk about the media, yes, you are right.
It's a very interconnected.
Yes, there are various fields to it. But if we're talking about media development, you know, yes, we have the equipments in the studio. We have, you know, the machines that do the printing and all of that. You have the internet that facilitates, you know, the dissemination of information and all of that. But then who makes all these things happen? It is the journalist. Talking about advertisers or people in marketing, people in public relations, I think what they do is to make use of the media to achieve, you know, whatever goals and objectives that they have. Because you have, you know, public relation practitioners working with various private organizations, you know, that are into different different aspects of work. And what they do is to make sure that they get the publicity, to make sure that they are earning the best, you know, publicity from the media. And so in the context of all this, when we talk about the media and specifically media development, I suppose that we are talking about, you know, journalism and the industry that makes it possible for people to receive and to communicate information. And I think that the confusion around what the media is may have contributed to the fact that we are hearing people at the Information Services Department were also beneficiaries of the Media Development Fund, because apparently the people there are journalists and so on and so forth. It's not about you being a journalist, it's about what you do. You know, because you have journalists working as public relations officers for banks.
Why do you think this argument will go? I mean, just give us we have a minute. Let's wrap up.
As I said, essentially, I think that the management of the first 1 million CDs has been a mess.
Oh, it's been all has been disbursed?
That's what I think.
1 million is a lot of money. Yeah?
Yes. It's gone. And I think we need to discuss the issues, to debate the issues, and make sure that the subsequent allocations are properly managed to be able to contribute to the objectives that for which the fund was set up.
Well, we have some of your comments here and on Facebook, and we have this one says the media has done averagely well except Joynews. Okay, does not verify their status before publishing them, and as objective as they are sometimes. Very poor, because all that I get from the media in favor of their respective political party hosts while poo-pooing their opponent. I suggest sanctions based on public opinion polls. And Nana Kweku Asuma seem to have that comment as well. And thanks for your contribution. We've had in the media giving us not only his thoughts, but the work of the foundation and going forward, what the role of the media should be for this very year and the next year ahead. Suleiman Brima is a Deputy Executive Director for the Media Foundation for West Africa. And thanks for joining us this morning. We'll hope to have you again in the studio. But that's it for AM Talk. Next, we'll bring you a lot more on the AM show, which is live on the Joynews channel of Multi TV.